Mark 6:45 to 56. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat to go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw his disciples straining at the oars, because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them. When they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out, because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. When they crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret and anchored there. And as soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus. They ran throughout the whole region and carried those who were ill on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages, towns, or countryside, they placed those who were ill in the marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. God bless the reading of his words. Jesus had just fed 5,000 men plus women and children with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Jesus breaks the bread and divides the fish. The disciples distribute the food to the crowds. Everyone eats and is satisfied. Not only are they able to feed the crowd, but there are also 12 baskets of broken pieces of fish and bread left. Jesus multiplies the 5 loaves and 2 fish for the 5,000. The people are about to crowd around Jesus and his disciples. Somehow Jesus wants to prevent further mingling between his disciples and the crowds. Jesus makes the disciples get into the boat. He instructs them to go to Bethsaida. Jesus dismisses the crowd. Jesus then goes up into the mountainside to pray. We are in Mark 6. In Mark 1, Jesus drives out an impure spirit from a man in the synagogue in Capernaum. He then heals many people and drives out more impure spirits. The crowds begin to gather around Jesus. Jesus becomes popular with the people. However, the next morning, Jesus withdraws to a solitary place to pray. Jesus has just fed 5,000 men, plus women and children. What does he do? Jesus goes up to the mountainside to pray. Jesus is deliberate about spending time in prayer after public events. He makes it a point not to let work with the crowds interfere with his time alone with God his Father. In some ways, God is also deliberate with us through this pandemic. We have not been able to get out as often as we like to. We keep ourselves safe from the coronavirus. However, I wonder if God is also deliberate about getting us to spend time in prayer with him at home. I have certainly spent more time in prayer and Bible reading during this pandemic. I pray for many things. I pray for my family. I pray for our church family. I pray. As I speak to God, I also want to make sure that I hear God speak to me. Prayer is a two-way street. We not only speak to God, God also speaks to us. God primarily speaks to us through the words of the Bible. God not only speaks to us on Sunday mornings, God also speaks to us on Monday mornings during the week. God may also speak to us during the week through the words of a friend or through something that happens in our lives. We need to be open to God. As Jesus prays from the mountainside, he sees his disciples in the boat. The high winds come, the waves become choppy. The disciples struggle in the boat. They get afraid. What will happen to us? Will we drown? Will the waves overwhelm us? Just before morning comes, Jesus decides to go to his disciples on the boat. Mark tells us that to do so, Jesus walks on the lake. Jesus walks on water. This is the second miracle that Jesus performs in 24 hours. He has just fed 5,000, the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now Jesus walks on water to get to his disciples in the boat. As Jesus passes by the boat, the disciples see him. They are terrified. Is this a ghost? The last thing they expect to see as they struggle in the boat is a human being walking towards them. Is this a human being or a ghost? How can a human being walk on water? Does this human being have superhuman powers? What is this ghost going to do to us? The disciples in the boat reflect what we experience when the wind comes and the waves get strong. We are in the boat in the middle of the storms of life. We are afraid. What is going to happen to us? Will we drown? Jesus comes to help us, but he looks like a ghost. What do we do? Eunice lives in Mexico. She speaks of a story when she was 4 years old. It was the middle of the night. She could not go to sleep. She was seeing shadows and images in her room. She was afraid. When I was about 4 years old, I lay in bed one evening unable to sleep. On the ceiling and the wall facing my bed, I could see shadows and images that for me had no apparent source. I was worried and fearful. Then my father noticed that I was having trouble going to sleep. He asked what the problem was. I explained my fear of the shadows on the wall. He patiently explained that what I was seeing was the light of the moon coming through the branches of the large trees outside. When the wind moved the branches, the light seemed to move. He said, focus on the light and not on the shadows. Remember, if shadows are present, that means there's light too. God's moon is shining on the earth. Then he taught me the Bible verse, Joshua 1 verse 9, and told me to repeat it when I was scared. He said that if I believe with all my heart, my fear will disappear. What does Joshua 1:9 say? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. I did what he said, and my fear left. That experience transformed me, and the words became my slogan. My commitment to remain strong and My commitment is to remain strong and vigilant. I'm confident of God's promise to be by my side wherever I go. My parents are no longer with me, but God's word remains sealed in my heart. So, will the disciples of Jesus survive this terrible storm in the middle of the lake? What about these ghosts they see walking on water coming towards them? Immediately the ghost speaks to them. They are surprised. It sounds like the familiar voice of Jesus. Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. The disciples might hear the voice of Jesus, but it is still not clear if it is Jesus himself. The wind is still blowing. The waves are still strong. Then Jesus does a few things to make sure that they know it is him. Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. Mark 6:51-52. It is not a ghost. It is Jesus himself in the flesh. Not only does Jesus climb into the boat, but the wind also stops. The lake becomes calm. They are completely amazed. In the space of 24 hours, Jesus does a few miraculous things. He feeds the 5,000. He walks on water to get to them in the boat, to prove that he is no ghost. When he gets into the boat, the wind dies down. They begin to see that from the feeding of the 5,000 to now the walking on the water, there is something different about Jesus. What is it? Why is Jesus different? He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them. Mark 6 verse 8. The expression Jesus is about to pass by them is a unique expression that goes back to the book of Exodus in the Old Testament. God speaks to Moses. Moses asks God to show him God's glory. God tells Moses that God is about to pass by. Then the Lord said, "There is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen." Exodus 33:21-23. God passes by Moses and protects Moses from God's holy presence. Otherwise, Moses will be consumed by God's holy presence. The hearts of the disciples are hardened. They cannot see God passing by. For they had not understood about the loaves, their hearts were hardened. Mark 6:52. This is like Pharaoh hardening his heart, even though Moses shows him the 10 plagues, which are signs of God's glory. Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. When Jesus says, "It is I," he is telling his disciples that it is I, the Lord of heaven and earth. Don't be afraid. I have things under control. You will be safe. You'll get through this. At the episode of the burning bush with Moses, God identifies himself as "I am who I am." Exodus 3 verse 14. By saying that it is I, Jesus claims to be "I am who I am" of Exodus 3. Jesus feeds the 5,000. Jesus walks on water. Jesus calms the sea. Jesus is the Lord of heaven and earth who comes to save them. Do not let your hearts be hardened. The disciples could not recognize Jesus as he walks on the water. Jesus tries to calm them with his words. Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. Then he gets into the boat with them. He calms the storm. Jesus provides them the shelter from the storm. He shows them that God is looking after them despite the high winds and the big waves. God is their shelter in the storm. God is with them in the boat. Sharon shares about God providing shelter for them when she was growing up as a child. When I was a child, my family sought shelter in the root cellar when tornadoes approached our area. The cellar was hollowed out of the earth behind our house, and wooden supports held the dirt walls in place. Flush with the ground, its hinged door led to 3 concrete steps going down. Many a night my family would huddle together alongside jars of vegetables and bins filled with potatoes. We sometimes waited in the dark for hours for relief from the dangerous lightning, wind, and rain. A strong hiding place is absolutely necessary for survival when tornadoes roar overhead. A hiding place is critical during the other storms life brings as well. Terminal illness, wayward children, financial downturns, and unending conflict. At these times, a dangerous and debilitating fear can roar through our hearts and minds. In Psalm 32 verse 7, the psalmist addresses God as "my hiding place," reminding us that God alone is our spiritual and emotional shelter. When fear interrupts our lives and drives us to hide in dark despair, God comforts, strengthens, and calms our soul. Sometimes God graciously removes the storm, but always God can remove our doubt and fear when we wait, pray, and seek God's face. Will we seek God's face when the storms of life come our way? He is walking on water to get to us. Amen.